I never thought I'd live to hear my own parents look me in the eye and say my children weren't welcome in their home. But there I was, standing in my kitchen, staring at my phone in disbelief. Thanksgiving was only a few weeks away, and my mom's voice sounded unusually cheerful when she called. "Sweetheart, we need to talk about Thanksgiving this year," she said. For a second, my heart softened. Despite the tension between us over the years, I still craved those family traditions. My kids, Sophie and Noah, absolutely adored their grandparents, despite the growing distance. "Of course, Mom. What's the plan?" I asked, already picturing the smell of roasted turkey, cinnamon, and the warm chaos of a family dinner at their house. There was a pause, just long enough to send a chill down my spine. "Well," she finally said, clearing her throat, "this year we're thinking of doing something a little different. A smaller gathering, just adults. You know, something more intimate." My brow furrowed. "So, no kids at all?" Another pause, then, more hesitantly, "Well, not exactly." A cold knot twisted in my stomach. "What do you mean?" Mom sighed, as if she were the one being put in an awkward position. "Rachel, we love your kids, we really do. But they're just, you know, energetic. And honestly, we think it might be better if you left them with a sitter this year." I gripped the edge of the counter. "So just my kids? What about Evan's?" Evan, my older brother, the golden child. The one who could do no wrong in their eyes, even when he very clearly did. Mom hesitated, and that told me everything. "Evan and Claire are bringing their boys," she admitted. "But you know how well behaved they are. They're just quieter, more composed. It's easier having them at the table." A rush of heat rose in my cheeks. It felt like a slap, like the ground had been pulled out from under me. "They're just children," I said, my voice tight. "Sophie is 7, Noah's 4. Of course they have energy, but they're sweet, and they love you. We're just trying to have a calm evening," Mom replied, her voice clipped now, irritated that I wasn't going along with it. "It's not personal, Rachel. Not personal." I clenched my jaw, swallowing the sharp words I wanted to scream. It wasn't just about Thanksgiving. It was the way they'd always treated my children like an afterthought, while putting Evan's boys on a pedestal. The way they went to every one of his kids' school plays, but somehow always missed Sophie's dance recitals. The way Christmas gifts were always just a little fancier for his boys, and now they weren't even pretending anymore. "I can't believe this," I whispered. "You're actually saying my kids aren't welcome, but Evan's are?" "Oh, Rachel, don't be dramatic," she sighed. "It's just one dinner. You and Mark are still invited, of course." I almost laughed at the absurdity. They wanted me there, but not the two little people I loved most in the world. I swallowed hard. "No, Mom. If my kids aren't welcome, then neither am I." A long silence stretched between us. Then she exhaled sharply, like I was the one being unreasonable. "Suit yourself." And just like that, she hung up. I stood there staring at the phone, my breath shaky. From the next room, I could hear Sophie and Noah laughing as they built a pillow fort, blissfully unaware that the grandparents they adored had just cast them aside like they were nothing. I took a deep breath, my mind spinning. I had spent my whole life trying to please my parents, trying to be the good daughter. But at what cost? If I went to that dinner, while my children sat at home wondering why they weren't good enough, what kind of mother would that make me? No, I wasn't doing this anymore. They had made their choice. Now it was time I made mine. And they'd regret it more than they ever imagined. The weight of her words still hung in the air as I stood alone in my kitchen, the quiet hum of the refrigerator filling the space. I set my phone down, my fingers trembling slightly, heart pounding with a storm of sadness and fury. I had always known they favored Evan, but I told myself it wasn't that bad, that deep down they loved us all equally. But tonight, they didn't even pretend. They loved his children more. A sudden burst of laughter echoed from the living room. I turned to see Sophie and Noah still tangled in their blanket fort, giggling with joy, oblivious to the sting of rejection that had just unfolded. They deserved better. I straightened my back and walked into the living room with a smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. "All right, you two," I said, my voice calmer than I felt. "Who's ready for movie night?" Noah's face lit up. "Can we watch the one with the talking dog?" I scooped him into my arms, pressing a kiss to his soft curls. "Of course we can, buddy." We curled up on the couch together, but inside the fire still burned. I had spent years trying to fit into their world, playing by their rules, hoping that if I just kept trying, I'd finally be treated like Evan. but it was never enough, and I was done trying. The next morning, I woke up to a text from Evan. Evan, Mom says you're being difficult about Thanksgiving. Why do you always have to make everything so dramatic? I stared at the screen, my jaw tightening. Of course. She'd already told him her version of the story. So she told you she uninvited my kids, but yours are still welcome? That was the message I sent to Evan after his passive-aggressive text accusing me of being dramatic again. The little typing bubbles blinked on the screen, then disappeared. A full minute passed before he finally replied, "She just wants a calm dinner, Rachel. You know how your kids can be." There it was. Not even subtle. A lot. That's how they saw my children. Like they were a burden. Something to be managed, not cherished. Something to tolerate, not love. Something inside me broke. "Enjoy your perfect Thanksgiving, Evan," I typed. "I won't be there." Then I turned off my phone before he could respond. If they didn't want me or my kids at their table, fine. They'd no longer get access to any part of me, because for years I had been the dependable one, the one who dropped everything to run their errands. When they needed groceries, I was there. When their internet went out, I was the one crawling under the table to reset the router. When it was time to organize a family event, I was their free planner, their go-to, their fixer. And Evan, the golden boy? He showed up late, left early, barely lifted a finger, and was still showered in praise. If I wasn't welcome in their preferred version of family, then they weren't going to benefit from me anymore. That door slammed shut. A week before Thanksgiving, my phone lit up with a familiar name, Mom. I stared at it for a while, debating whether to answer. Eventually, I picked up. "Hi, Rachel," she said, her voice carefully light, like she was walking on eggshells. "Just wanted to check in." Silence. "I know you were upset, but I really hope you'll reconsider. We'd love to have you and Mark there. Just me and my husband. Not our children. Just me." I took a long, steady breath. "I meant what I said, Mom. If Sophie and Noah aren't welcome, neither am I." She let out an exaggerated sigh, like I was the exhausting one. "I just don't understand why you're being so stubborn. It's one night. You know how much Evan's boys mean to us?" And there it was. No attempt to deny it, no shame. Just honesty. At last, the kind that stung more than a slap. The two tiny humans I'd give my life for would never be enough for her. I swallowed hard. "Thanks for making it clear where we stand," I said. "I won't bother you again. Rachel, don't be like..." Click. I ended the call before she could finish. This time, I didn't cry. I started small. The following weekend, Dad called to ask if I could come set up his new TV. I let it go to voicemail. Then Mom texted to ask if I could pick up her prescription. I didn't even open it. For years, I had been their unpaid assistant, always available, always reliable. Not anymore. And it didn't take long for them to notice. By the time Thanksgiving rolled around, I had ignored 12 missed calls and 6 texts. That morning, a new message popped up on my phone. "Evan again? Mom and Dad are really upset you're ignoring them. Are you seriously going to let this go this far?" I replied with exactly one sentence. It went too far the moment they told me my kids weren't welcome. He didn't respond. I turned off my phone. That morning, Sophie and Noah were standing at the kitchen table, covered in flour as they helped Mark mix pancake batter. They were laughing hysterically every time he made a silly face or flipped a pancake too high. This was our Thanksgiving, and for the first time in years, I felt peace. No stress over making the perfect side dish. No dressing the kids up in stiff, itchy clothes. No pretending to be someone else for a family that never really saw me. Just us, our laughter, the smell of maple syrup and cinnamon in the air. But I should have known. My parents weren't finished yet. The phone rang again. Mom. I stared at it, let it go to voicemail. Then it rang again, and again. Mark raised an eyebrow. "Want me to just turn it off?" I shook my head. "If it's something serious, I should at least know." I picked up. My voice was flat. "What is it?" "Oh, so now you decide to answer?" She snapped. "I suppose you're just sitting there, feeling sorry for yourself, while we're all having a lovely Thanksgiving?" I sighed. "If you called just to gloat, I'm not interested." "That's not why I called," she snapped again, her tone sharpening. "I need to ask you something." I braced myself. "What now?" There was a beat of silence. "Did you cancel the credit card?" Everything went still. I turned slightly, stepping away from Mark, lowering my voice. "What are you talking about?" "Your father's card, the one we've been using for groceries, gas, essential things. It was declined this morning." A cold realization started to crawl up my spine. The card she was talking about wasn't theirs. It was mine. Years ago, when Dad had surgery and they were tight on money, I added them as authorized users on my credit card, just to help them get by. It was supposed to be temporary, just a few months. I had meant to remove them when things got better, but life got busy, and I forgot. And they never reminded me. I felt my chest tighten. You mean my credit card? There was a pause. Then she scoffed. Oh, Rachel, don't be so dramatic. It's just a card. You make good money. We figured. You figured what? I interrupted, my voice shaking now. That I'd just keep paying? That I wouldn't notice? Don't act like this is some big betrayal, she said flatly. We raised you. The least you can do is support us now. I stared at the wall, too stunned to speak for a moment. Are you serious? I finally said, barely above a whisper. After telling me my kids aren't good enough to sit at your table, you still expected me to cover your groceries? There was no apology, no remorse, just silence. Because to her, it wasn't betrayal, it was entitlement. I realized in that moment that this wasn't just about a holiday or even a credit card. It was about control. They had never seen me as an equal, just as an extension of themselves. Useful, convenient, disposable. And now, they were finally seeing what it looked like when I took my power back. Do you even hear yourself? I snapped. Mom let out one of her long, theatrical sighs, the kind she always gave when she wanted to paint herself as the victim. You know what, Rachel? This is exactly why we avoid having difficult conversations with you. You always overreact. Overreact. I had heard that word my entire life. Every time I expressed a boundary, every time I stood up for myself, every time I pointed out the double standard. But I wasn't swallowing it this time. You're right about one thing, I said, my voice low and steady. Razor sharp. I did cancel the card. There was a stunned pause. And since we're apparently being honest now, let me make one thing very clear, I continued. You're not getting another cent from me. Not now. Not ever. A sharp gasp echoed through the phone, like I'd slapped her across the face. Rachel, don't be ridiculous. I didn't let her finish. And while we're at it, don't expect birthday gifts, or Christmas gifts, or emergency bailouts. You made your choice the moment you said my kids weren't welcome in your home. Now I'm making mine. There was a heavy silence, and then her voice came back, colder than I'd ever heard it. You'll regret this. And just like that, she hung up. I stood there frozen, gripping my phone so tightly my fingers ached. My chest heaved with emotion. Not sadness, not even rage, just clarity. For once in my life, I wasn't the one being manipulated. I turned slowly, stepping back into the kitchen. Mark was leaning against the counter, watching me quietly. Everything okay? He asked gently. I forced a smile. Yeah, I said, my voice calmer than I felt. Just taking out the trash. He didn't press. He knew better. We spent the rest of Thanksgiving in our own little bubble, baking cookies, watching silly movies, building blanket forts, and playing board games. For the first time in years, I didn't feel like I was performing, or pretending, or trying to earn love. But even in the peace, something in my gut told me it wasn't over, and I was right. Because when people like my parents lose control, they don't let go quietly. 3 days after Thanksgiving, my phone buzzed with an incoming call. Evan. I almost ignored it. Almost. Curiosity got the better of me. I answered. What do you want? I said flatly. What the hell, Rachel? He barked. Mom just called me crying. Said you cut them off. What is wrong with you? I closed my eyes, already tired of this script. Did she also mention they'd been using my credit card for years without telling me? There was a beat of silence. Well, she said you were helping them out. I let out a dry, humorless laugh. Helping them out? Evan, they racked up thousands of dollars in charges without asking, while simultaneously treating my kids like they didn't belong. But sure, let's pretend I'm the villain here. He let out a sigh, clearly trying to keep his cool. Look, I get that you're upset. Upset? I cut in. They excluded my children from Thanksgiving like they were a nuisance. Like they didn't count. They just wanted a quiet evening, he muttered. You know how your kids can be a little wild. I felt the anger rise in my throat. Oh, I see. So they're fine using my money behind my back. But my kids aren't good enough for their table? You're twisting this. No, Evan. I'm finally seeing it clearly. He went quiet for a moment. Then his tone shifted. Calculated, like he was shifting from emotional to strategic. Okay, look, maybe we can figure something out. What if you still help them out a little? Like a monthly transfer, something small. That way, no one suffers over a misunderstanding. I laughed, cold and sharp. Let me get this straight. You want me to keep sending money to the people who literally told me they prefer your kids over mine? They didn't mean it like that. They said it, Evan. He didn't have a comeback for that. After a long pause, his voice stiffened. Fine. If you want to be selfish, that's on you. But don't expect mom and dad to forgive you. I smirked and shook my head. I'll survive. Before he could say another word, I hung up. The next few weeks passed in silence. No calls, no messages. Radio silence from my parents, a tactic I was all too familiar with. They thought if they ignored me long enough, I'd come crawling back like I always had, desperate for approval. But what they didn't understand was I didn't need their approval anymore. And just when I thought they'd finally accepted it, they pulled one last stunt. It was the week before Christmas when Mark came inside holding an envelope. His brows furrowed as he looked at the return address. It's from your parents, he said, handing it to me. I stiffened. Oh, great, I muttered. Guilt trip? Gaslighting? A surprise invitation to more emotional manipulation? Mark smirked. Only one way to find out. I took the envelope and carefully tore it open. My stomach twisted. Inside was a legal document. I blinked in disbelief, scanning the lines of text. They were demanding reimbursement for years of emotional and financial support. I actually laughed. Not a light, amused laugh. A laugh of complete disbelief. You've got to be kidding me. Mark took the paper and read through it, his expression darkening. They're billing you, he said slowly, for your childhood? Apparently, they were. They had included itemized expenses. Food, school supplies, clothing, medical bills. Everything from when I was a child. And at the bottom of the page, a total, 78 därför two, nearly 80 grand. I stared at it, stunned. They seriously think I'm going to pay them nearly $80,000? Mark scoffed. They're desperate. I nodded slowly, a slow burn rising in my chest. This isn't about money. This is about control. They know they've lost their grip, and now they're just flailing. Mark looked at me, concerned. So, what are you going to do? I looked down at the letter in my hands. My decision was already made. I'm going to pay them a visit. What's fair? I repeated, letting out a sharp, bitter laugh. You want to charge me for being your daughter, while expecting me to keep giving you free money for the rest of your lives? Dad appeared behind Mom, arms folded, wearing the same smug expression he always did when he felt justified. We sacrificed a lot for you, Rachel, he said, and now you're abandoning us. I stared at them, shaking my head. No, Dad. You abandoned me when you told me my children weren't good enough to sit at your table, when you lied to me, when you stole from me, when you put a dollar amount on what my love was worth. Mom's lips tightened into a straight, cold line. If you won't pay, she said icily, then I suppose we'll need to involve lawyers. I didn't flinch. I held her gaze, unshaken. Go ahead, I said, calm, dead serious. She blinked, caught off guard. What? I crossed my arms. Take me to court. Explain to a judge that you're suing your own daughter for the cost of food and clothes from 20 years ago. Let's see how that plays out. For the first time, they both looked unsure. Dad cleared his throat, his confidence starting to falter. We just thought, maybe you'd want to make things right. I let out a dry laugh. Oh, I am making things right. Right now. I held up the ridiculous letter, the one with the $78,000 bill for my childhood, and ripped it in half. Then in half again. And again, I dropped the pieces at my feet, their eyes widened in disbelief. I'm done being your personal ATM, I said, voice low. Mom gasped. You ungrateful little... I didn't wait for the rest. I turned on my heel. Merry Christmas, I called out over my shoulder as I walked back to my car. And for the first time in my life, I felt free. As I drove away, something clicked inside me, a shift I'd been waiting for my entire life. It wasn't about the money. It never was. What hurt them the most wasn't the cancellation of a card. It was the fact that, for the first time ever, I had the power. And I wasn't giving it back. I thought maybe, just maybe, that would be the end of it. That tearing up their absurd letter and walking away would finally force them to face what they'd done. But people like my parents don't reflect. They retaliate. It started small. 2 days before Christmas, I got a text from Mom. Mom, Rachel, this is ridiculous. We're family. You don't turn your back on family over a silly argument. I ignored it. The next day, another message. Mom, we forgive you. Come to Christmas dinner and we'll forget this ever happened. I almost laughed. They forgive me? Then, hours later, Evan chimed in. Evan, they're really hurting, Rachel. Just apologize so we can move on. Of course. In his perfect world, I was the one who had done something wrong. I typed back, me. Funny. They weren't hurting when they were stealing from me, or when they said my kids weren't welcome. I think they'll survive. Then I blocked his number. Christmas Eve arrived, and for once, it felt magical. Mark and I had just finished decorating the tree. Sophie and Noah were in their pajamas, spinning in circles to Christmas music, too excited to sleep. It was warm, cozy, ours. Then, the doorbell rang. Mark and I locked eyes. No way, he muttered. I walked to the door and looked through the peephole. Of course, Mom, Dad, Evan, and Claire. A holiday ambush. I hesitated, then opened the door. Only halfway. What do you want? I asked, arms crossed. Mom's face lit up with a bright fake cheer. Merry Christmas, sweetheart. Dad held out a massive, beautifully wrapped box. We brought something for the kids. I didn't move. No thanks, I said flatly. Mom's smile faltered. Rachel, don't be like this. Let's not ruin Christmas over a disagreement. You already did, I snapped. When you told me my children weren't good enough to be at your table, remember? Her mouth opened, then closed. Dad tried again, more gently. Come on, Rachel. Let's just be a family again. I stared at them, heart pounding, but all I felt was tired. You don't want to be a family, I said quietly. You want me to go back to being useful. They didn't respond. That silence told me everything I needed to know. I shook my head. Take your gift and go. Mom's expression hardened. Don't be selfish, Rachel. Think about the children. I smiled, ice in my voice. I am thinking about the children. That's exactly why you're not in their lives anymore. Dad's jaw clenched. You really want to do this? I nodded. I already did. And with that, I shut the door. That night, we had the best Christmas I'd ever experienced. Sophie and Noah tore into their presents with shrieks of joy. We drank hot cocoa, played board games, and snuggled under blankets watching Christmas movies until the kids fell asleep on the couch, still wearing their party hats. And for the first time in my life, Christmas wasn't about performing, or pleasing, or proving I was enough. It was about us, a real family, a chosen family, the kind that loves without conditions, without competition, the kind that loves because they want to, not because they expect anything in return. I thought that was the end. I thought being cut off, humiliated, and rejected at my front door would be enough to convince them I was done. But I underestimated just how much control they thought they still had over me, because on New Year's Eve, they made their next move. No thanks, I said flatly, standing firm in the doorway. Dad let out a long sigh. Rachel, enough. You've made your point. Let's fix this before it goes too far. I narrowed my eyes. Too far? What does that even mean? Mom and Evan exchanged a glance, one of those silent, pre-rehearsed communications that always made my skin crawl. We just don't want this to affect the kids, she said, her voice thick with faux concern. My stomach twisted. Something about her tone felt wrong. Off. What are you talking about? Evan stepped forward, arms crossed like he was the one who had been wronged. Mom and Dad have been speaking with a lawyer. A cold wave of dread washed over me. A lawyer? I repeated, my voice barely above a whisper. Mom nodded, her eyes gleaming with fake sympathy. We're worried about you, Rachel. You've cut your children off from their real family over a silly misunderstanding. It's not fair to them. My heart pounded in my chest. What exactly are you trying to say? Dad cleared his throat. We've been looking into grandparents' rights. For a moment, all I could hear was the roar of blood in my ears. And then, I laughed. It wasn't a soft, amused laugh. It was loud, disbelieving, sharp. They actually thought they could legally force their way back into my life, into my children's lives. Evan's face twisted. What's so funny? I wiped the corners of my eyes. You're serious, I said, shaking my head. You really think a judge is going to side with you in this mess? Mom's lips thinned. We've done nothing wrong. Nothing wrong? I repeated, stepping forward. You stole from me. You manipulated me. You treated my kids like they were beneath yours. And now, because I finally said no, you want to sue your way back in? Dad's face darkened. You don't want to do this, Rachel. I met his glare with an icy smile. Oh, but I do. I pulled my phone from my pocket and held it up. Think very carefully about what you're about to do, I said, voice cold and razor sharp, because I have everything. Every text, every voicemail, every demand for money. And if you try to drag me into court, I will bury you with it. Claire gasped from behind Evan. Rachel, come on. No, I snapped, eyes locked on my parents. You have no case. You know it. I know it. And if you keep pushing me, I'll make sure everyone you know sees who you really are. There was a long silence, the kind that sits in your chest like a thundercloud. Then Mom's expression shifted, twisted with fury. You're being unreasonable. I smiled. No, Mom, I'm finally being smart. I stepped back into my house, fingers tightening around the doorknob. Happy New Year, I said sweetly. Then I slammed the door in their faces. They never followed through with their pathetic legal threat because they knew they had nothing. And more importantly, they knew they had lost. In the weeks that followed, the silence was absolute. No texts, no calls, not a single passive-aggressive guilt trip. And for the first time in my life, it felt like freedom. The weight of their expectations was gone. The constant pressure to please, perform, and prove myself, gone. The endless loop of guilt and manipulation, gone. Months passed. And one sunny afternoon in early spring, I sat on the porch, a cold lemonade in my hand, watching Sophie and Noah chase bubbles in the yard. Their laughter floated up into the breeze, light and carefree. Mark stepped outside and handed me another glass, settling in beside me. It's been quiet, he said. I nodded. Yeah? Feels good. He smirked. Think they'll ever try again? I looked out at my children, their tiny feet stomping in the grass, their joy completely unburdened by the darkness we had escaped. I don't care if they do, I said softly, because I've already won. I had my kids, my family, and I would never, never let anyone make them feel unwanted again.